Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Mike Mason, who is the creative director of Call of Cthulhu, and we talked about failing your roles. Call of Cthulhu is a game where it's really fun to see your investigators go mad and get eaten by monsters, but you want to make sure that that still feels fun for players and it doesn't feel like you're cheating them out of anything. Mike talks about how to make failure fun, how players can stack the odds in their favor, and how keepers can make those moments where everything goes disastrously astray feel the most rewarding from a gameplay perspective. Before we start, I'll quickly say that we filmed some of the questions for this interview after the fact, so you'll notice my shirt changes color a few times. I hope you enjoy the interview, and thanks for watching.
Failing a role. Okay, so let's just backtrack one thing slightly, because this is a point that sometimes can be missed when you're kind of learning the system, and maybe we don't emphasize it enough, which is why I'm doing it now. Before you make a role, you should be setting a goal. You should be saying, what do you actually want to achieve? What you want to achieve is not actually making a role. You want to achieve something. So let's say let's do the really easy one. Okay, you might say, I wanted to climb the wall. That is a kind of goal, but actually what your goal is, you want to actually get to somewhere. So it may be, I want to get over the wall to the grounds of the manor house. I want to actually access the window and into the room above. That's actually my goal. So when you define that goal, what you're doing is actually helping to define what the outcomes could be, which makes life a lot easier for both you and the keeper. And if the player isn't defining the goal, the keeper's role is to kind of help them, to nudge them into defining what the goal is. So not just doing a role most of the time.
So it's important to be precise. You want to say what you're actually trying to achieve, what your goal is, not just what your investigator might be doing. What happens though when you try a role and you actually fail it?
So when you fail that role, okay, let's move ahead. You've agreed the goal. I want to get into the bed chamber up there on the second floor. That's my goal. And so that's your goal. So you and the keeper now agree that's your role. To do that, that's going to require a climb roll. Because you could do it another way. You could be you sneak in the house and it's a stealth roll. But your goal, the easiest route to the access is a climb roll. So you make the climb roll and you fail the roll. Okay, so in the game you have effectively three options. With a failed roll, you can let that stand. You haven't managed to attain your goal. So maybe you climbed halfway and then kind of lost your footing, or it wasn't very safe until you climbed back down. Maybe you slipped a bit and lost your confidence. Maybe you got to the window and you couldn't now get in, because your goal is to get inside, not just climb the wall. So maybe you're at the window, but you haven't succeeded to get inside. So although you've failed the climb roll, you have climbed, but you've not succeeded in your goal. So you can let that stand, and then what happens next would be, well, what do you want to do now? I'm now going to use locksmith or strength or dexterity to kind of finagle the window latch or something to get in. So I've now created another situation where there's a goal to, I want to get through the barrier is my goal. Or it may be you drop that down and go, actually, you know what, sneaking in, that might work better. So you try a different route in. So that's a failed roll. There's no massive consequence other than you've failed to reach the goal.
One of the things that I found really great about Call of Cthulhu when I first jumped into the system was that if you failed something like a stealth check or a sleight of hand check or a climb check, in the example you just gave, it didn't immediately mean that you were going to fail and get caught or take damage. It let you take more risks because you fail specifically in your goal. You don't get that whole penalty right away.
That's right. I mean, obviously, every situation and game can be a little different. And there may be some consequences to just a straight failed roll, but it shouldn't be kind of life altering. It shouldn't be that you suddenly die. I mean, in old versions of the rules, that was the case. You could fail your die roll and then take 6d10 damage. You're dead on one failed roll, which, okay, for a horror game, it's not actually that scary, is it? It's actually just a bit dull and actually just stops the scenario, really. So we want to play, you want to enjoy it. So there may be some consequences, but there should be minor consequences, really. Just annoyances to some degree. Maybe a point of damage at most, if let's say if there's a damage incurred.
So that's one approach. What are the other options players have?
Your other option would be to push the roll. That's the sort of standard rule that you really want to attain your goals. So you want to give it another go. You're basically almost remotivating your character to kind of give it another go. And the whole point of the push roll is what extra, what in addition to whatever you did before when you failed your first attempt, are you now going to put into this? What is your motivation almost? So again, I'm climbing the wall is I'm gonna cast caution to the wind, and where it started to get slippery and I thought I wasn't really going to get much further, it was more dangerous, so I stopped. I'm going to throw caution to the wind. I'm really kind of go up as quickly as I can and grab what I can and go up, and so I'm risking more life and limb in that case. And obviously knocking down a door, I'm throwing I'm taking a running jump at it. I'm not just giving it a punch or a kick. I'm throwing my entire weight at this door, really kind of using all my strength and momentum to break through this door that's a barrier to me. That's a push roll because I'm upping the ante. Basically, I'm putting more personal stake into attaining the goal. So again, that tends to be a quick conversation with the keeper who basically, yeah, that sounds good, or tell me what else you're doing to really achieve this goal now. And so you agree that. And at this point, the keeper may foreshadow what a failure looks like and say, well, if you throw your entire weight at this door, you could injure yourself, or you could make a noise that could alert people you don't want to alert, that kind of thing. And the player has a choice to say, well, now I've thought about the consequences, in the split second I'm about to do it, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to push the roll. Okay, that's cool.
I found that pushing rolls really adds to the horror tension within a scenario, because you get people always wanting to push the envelope a little further, and it gives investigators some narrative control. But I do have one thing that I run into sometimes when I play the game, and that is the difficulty of thinking of a push for every situation. I've had some occasions where somebody fails a library use roll and they start to justify to me how they'll stay up all night, and sometimes that risk doesn't feel real. Do you have any advice for keepers who encounter that situation?
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to think of what the justification might be, but inside, I don't think you need to be too harsh with it, because somebody failing a library use roll, there's a number of ways you could push that in real life. I'll just draw from real life. Yeah. Spending longer in the library is a valid reason, because, while you're longer in the library, the monster is flying around eating people, or the cultists are getting on with their ritual, or whatever it is. Yeah. That's what's happening in the background. The more time you waste means the more things are happening that you've now got to deal with later. So there is a consequence to spending more time. So being longer in the library is a legitimate, push. Equally, saying I'm going to go to the librarian and get them to help me is great, because you are now having to reveal to somebody you don't know a little bit about what you're doing. So, and obviously there's things could be the librarian could be, I don't know, the girlfriend or the boyfriend of one of the cultists, or somehow involved in a non, or it could just be they're not. But when the cultists come in later to say, hey, has anyone been looking for this book? They go, oh, actually, there was this fella who was in earlier, describe you completely. And now they know there's somebody looking into the things that they're interested in. So so there are consequences to these kind of things, which is what it's all about. As you say, it's all about kind of building some momentum and tension and kind of deepening the layers of kind of the mystery and horror in a sense. That's the whole point of the kind of the push mechanic, is to ultimately get your character deeper into trouble potentially, which is part of the fun of the game.
So what's the third option that you've given? I guess that it's luck, but I'll confirm that with you quickly.
Yeah, so luck is the third option, and obviously in the 7th edition rules, luck is an optional rule, and not everyone necessarily will want to use it in their games. We found over the whatever I can't remember how many years it is now, 8 years or more, that the current edition of Call of Cthulhu has been out in the world. people, there was initially a little bit of kind of hesitation to use it, or feeling that it kind of watered down the horror and gave the players too much agency, that kind of thing. But in practice, over time, people have embraced it really and found it actually it's quite a useful little mechanic that actually doesn't really interfere in any of those things. Really, it just gives the players a little bit more agency and ability to move through some of the kind of bumps and wiggles that kind of sometimes get in the way. Failing a roll by a couple of percentage, that kind of stuff. Just you can smooth these cracks over and keep the game flowing, basically. So spending luck is that kind of third option to say, yeah, we want to do this. Let's just spend the luck, because again, it balances with the horror of the game. You spend your luck, you get less lucky, and if you spend it wantonly, like I tend to do when I'm playing Call of Cthulhu, I run out of luck very quickly, putting my character further in depth in the danger of the scenario, which for me is great fun. I want my character to be in peril because that's the point of playing a horror game. Can they survive? Can they not? So, it's that kind of downward spiral, just like hit points in any game and sanity points in Call of Cthulhu. It's a downward spiral that ultimately all is about putting your character in peril, because peril is drama, and drama is what drives role-playing games and makes them, an interesting experience.
I've also always found that you've never got enough luck. Even if you get out of one terrible situation, there's another one that'll be coming very, very soon. I have a couple of questions about luck, and these are basically just things that I've run into keeping games of Call of Cthulhu that I'm essentially running past you now. When you are playing for people who want to use their luck to bump down degrees of success, so not just pull themselves into a success where they might have a failure, but they want to really get that extreme success as much of a benefit as they can, is that something you should encourage or you should steer away from?
I encourage it, because it guarantees them achieving the goal they want to achieve as a player, and the more that they, by changing the level of success from a regular to a hard or to an extreme, usually requires a fair amount of luck spend. Maybe just a handful of points, so it's neither here nor there. But usually, when it matters, it's like 20 points or more. I spent 60 points of luck to get an extreme success before, because it's my character's going to get eaten, about to get eaten, and all their friends, his friends are, or whatever. And so that's a it's a kind of a last ditch attempt to kind of say, I'll pull out all the stops and I leave myself completely wide open now. So, if the monster's got a brother that I'm not aware about that's about to step into the room, I'm done for, but at least I tried, you know what I mean? So I think, I encourage my players to spend as much luck as quickly as possible in games. Obviously they don't want to do that, quite rightly, because it puts them further in peril. But that, as I keep saying, that's kind of the point of the game in a way. And so spending luck to change that can make a big difference, particularly in combat. Obviously, if you do get into a combat situation, it's the one tool the players have to try and survive the combat, because as we know, Call of Cthulhu combat is pretty lethal. And so it's the one kind of safety valve they've got, is if they've got a bit of luck, they can maybe turn the tide of the combat quicker, because they can spend their luck and alter it into an extreme roll and get a little bit more damage done, maybe take down the bad guys or monster a little quickly, because every round the baddies get to affect you is another round where your character could just go, because one bullet, like in real life, will take out a character most of the time. So that's what it's about.
I've also found that having the luck and push mechanics in place really allows you to give players a reason to try again. I sometimes find it difficult to have that last blow fall that actually kills a player. But when you have all of these methods in place to save them, you don't feel as bad, because if those methods didn't work out for them, or if they expended all their resources, well, that's kind of on them. You don't take the blame for being a Grim Reaper.
Yeah, I often have kind of characterized being a keeper is just what your job is, just to feed out enough rope to the players, and they're the ones that the consequences will fall on because of their actions. I mean, that's the ideal, because that's, you know, there are occasionally surprise things happening and suddenly this happens and it causes a problem. But in the main, letting the characters have that agency to allow themselves to get themselves in, dig a deeper hole than they could have been in, it allows the players at the end to kind of go, yeah, that is kind of on us. And in a sense, that's almost more enjoyable, because it doesn't feel like, you know, the hand of God has struck them down from nowhere and it just feels a bit unfair. It feels that they've had a hand in their own downfall or success, and therefore it's all the more richer. And often, you know, that's a funner tale to tell when you meet up a few weeks or years later and recount your escapades during Masks of Nyarlathotep, and because you will remember, you will say, you know what, when we all got eaten by the Shoggoth, and your last is, you spent 80 luck to get that extreme success, but you only rolled like 2 and he still only scratched it, and then it ate you up. That's your gaming tale. That's your kind of war story that you're going to remember, and it's all the more richer and enjoyable because of your involvement in it.
So that's it. There's push mechanics, there's letting things stand, and there's luck. As a final question, do you have any advice for players who might be coming across from other systems where failure is less fun, it's less part of the game and part of the experience, to see death and horror on the horizon?
You're coming to a different game, you know, like moving to any other kind of different game. There is a slightly different mindset, you know. Playing RuneQuest to Call of Cthulhu, it's a slightly different mindset. Playing Pendragon or Savage Worlds or whatever it may be, it's a slightly different mindset. So you do have to take that into account and try and embrace the mindset that is the style of the game in terms of gameplay. One thing I would say about failure is that there are historically, certainly in older role-playing games, you know, making a roll for something is kind of second nature, that you make a roll for everything. I get up in the morning, I make a roll. Do I get up well or not? Which is pointless in Call of Cthulhu. You know, we only really should be making kind of skill rolls, that kind of roll, when it's important to do so, when it's dramatic, when there's a real consequence to not achieving your goal, and when there is a good you know, when you achieve it, it moves things on as well. So, you know, a roll should be made with, you know, that it can be, that the plot and the narrative of the adventure can move forward whether you fail or succeed. You know, failure means you've got to try again or do something differently. Success means you go over that hurdle and you're on to the next hurdle, kind of thing. So think very carefully about when to ask for a roll, and don't ask for the kind of the pointless ones, the ones that don't have any meaning, because then you're not having this kind of conversation about what does failure look like. Well, failure just looks like I'm doing nothing. So that's one of the kind of key kind of ingredients for newer players coming into the game. It's to, you know, not to, as a keeper, don't call for a roll, and as a player, don't keep asking to make rolls. Don't ask for make rolls, full stop. Ask to achieve goals. My character wants to do this or achieve this thing, or yeah, don't try to avoid the kind of the commonality of, I want to make a psychology roll, because it's kind of bland and it doesn't, you know, you know, make it part of your character. My character is suspicious of what this NPC is saying. I'm looking into their eyes. Can I get a read on them? It just makes it more interesting and makes your character more vibrant and brings you deeper into the game, rather than just, I'll make a psychology roll. Is he lying? I mean, you know, we all do that from time to time, but I'm trying to say, if you can try to weave in, you know, a little bit more kind of style to your presentation in a way, you'll enjoy it more.